Hello, Emily.
Hi, Dan.
So, what are we going to talk about today?
The importance of storytelling, navigating sensitive topics, and the efficacy of side hustles.
Welcome to the Science of Wealth, where we discuss the science behind financial planning and the art of learning and applying it. Okay, you would like me to story tell a sensitive topic about side hustles. We can try. I can try to wind all these together.
I think I can do it. They all make sense in my mind. But starting with the storytelling one, there's kind of two pieces or elements to that one. The first part for me being when we're connecting with clients is kind of what I want to go into first. It's we've talked about it in previous episodes, but like having trust with your advisor and someone that you just met is tough. And I think an important element of building trust and getting to know somebody, especially in the beginning stages, is storytelling, both when we talk to them and when they talk to us.
Yeah, it's an interesting piece because a lot of financial topics are very esoteric and hard to follow on a fundamental level. So we're very prone to the use of metaphors and stories and examples to try to kind of illustrate or explain particular issues or items. I'm very, very fond, for example, of the Chesty Puller Chosin Reservoir story as far as trying to explain, like, look, your financial situation is your financial situation, and we're going to have to just win with the things that we have. And that's something that sort of comes down to just a fundamental thing. A lot of people feel sort of insecure or lost around finances because they don't get a formal education in it. And on some level, some clients do come to us and say, hey, I want to learn about finance. I want to understand investing or insurance or whatever it is better. But by extension from that, often, though we try to educate our clients and make sure they have a healthy understanding of what we're doing, often it's enough for them to just have a conceptual grasp rather than trying to spend a ton of time really getting into the nitty gritty details of, covariance between assets and so on.
Right. I definitely have had meetings with your clients or any other people, and they want to know the specifics of a Roth conversion or why it works. And it's like, I'm happy to explain that to them. But at the end of the day, it's more important in most cases in meetings to get to the storytelling piece. I want to know what's going on in their lives and all those pieces like that. And we can handle the other parts, the more technical parts on the back end.
Sure. And let's use something like a Roth conversion as a good example, or specifically the backdoor Roth conversion or Roth contribution. So the technical issue here is that if your income is above certain thresholds based on whether you're individual filing for taxes or whether you're filing married jointly or single, you have certain limitations on your income to be able to directly contribute to a Roth IRA. The way that you technically get around that is you fund a traditional IRA with a non-deductible contribution and then essentially convert it, shortly thereafter into the Roth, because there's an unlimited convertibility provision insofar as you're able to do that with your IRAs. The way that I will story tell that or explain that to a client is there is an income limit, and I want you to imagine that income limit as a gate, right? And that gate is blocking you from making a direct contribution to your Roth IRA, but the gate has no fence on either side. So you can walk right around it by doing this two-step process of funding the traditional IRA and then converting it. That's a basic visual that makes sense from the standpoint of like, wait, so I can't contribute, but you're telling me that I can contribute, but I can go around it. But how does that work? People don't necessarily need to understand like the paperwork and the forms and the potential tax issues or treatments of those conversions and so on. It's enough to just explain, look, there's a barrier, we can go around it, and that will have a positive financial impact in your particular case.
Right. Have you had trouble? I've been in on your meetings the last year or so, but you've been doing this longer than I have, kind of getting to that point with people and helping them understand why it's important that we do it that way rather than getting too technical.
On some level, I sort of try to think of any conversation in financial planning as being best when we spend the least amount of time talking about the actual financial things. And what I mean by that is, on some level, our clients are going to benefit most if they are fully delegating to us and just letting us take care of it for them as much as we can, or letting us handhold them directly in the circumstances where they need to be handheld directly. In particular cases like, well, how and why and what's the potential benefit and so on, I think the best conversation conversation is one in which the client implicitly trusts us to be doing what is in their interest and be giving them guidance in their interest and making things in their interest happen. And I think if we spend a lot of time on the nitty gritty details, that detracts from the value we provide, A, because it's not necessarily going to make a difference. They're either going to take our advice or not take our advice, or let us do the thing or not let us do the thing. But also on some level, the back to storytelling, the example I always try to bring up in this particular question is, imagine going to any surgeon for a brain surgery, heart surgery, whatever it is, and it's on you, right? And you might ask your doctor 25 questions, and you might Google the heck out of it, and you might really, really, really want to do your due diligence around what this procedure is, how it's going to benefit you, what the risks and complications are, what the recovery time is going to be, all of that. And all of that knowledge is comforting potentially. It helps you inform a decision on your part to say yes. But when the time comes, you are going to have to say yes, and you're going to have to trust that they do it correctly for you, because you can't actually influence the outcome. You have to trust this professional to know what they're doing, to have made the right recommendation, and to have that positive impact on your life. And so that's where I again sort of say an ideal financial planning conversation is one in which the technical details essentially never come up.
Is that why you have our meetings structured the way you do? I mean, as I've been working under you and learning under you, the initial consult specifically, we never talk numbers. We never have them bring in statements or information. I've had a lot of people that book say, what do I need to prepare for this first meeting with you guys? What should I bring? And the answer is always nothing. And we don't talk about specifics at all. Is that kind of to set the tone in the beginning?
That's part of it. There's a really significant amount of value also in just spending the time to get to know this person as a person. I think a lot of people are used to being listened to, but not being heard. And often a initial planning consultation and the conversations thereof might be quite literally the first time somebody has actually just sat down and listened to somebody tell their story in months or years or even in their entire lives, in a way, because we don't know this person usually, right? We get referrals and occasionally like friends or family members or whatever the case is come and work with us. But the vast majority of people we talk to in an initial consultation, we have no context for. And so not only do they benefit by getting to tell their story and actually have that be heard and absorbed by somebody, but it's also very beneficial for us in that getting to know the client phase. And people think, it's a finance conversation. I need to bring statements and documents and, have all my numbers organized and so on. But I found, number one, most people don't really have those things very well organized in the first place. So it's lovely of them to want to bring it and share it with us. But on some level, it may not give us the full picture we would otherwise desire. But also it becomes a distraction, right? When the conversation, and you've seen this, when the conversation becomes a conversation about really specific accounts or specific investments or specific insurance policies, et cetera, the ability to make a human connection kind of falls off a cliff in the conversation, because now we're getting sucked into this statement that they're putting in front of us. But also, there's no value we can deliver in that conversation directly, in the sense that, like, if you give me your statements, your documents, your balances, whatever the case is, I can see it, but I can't evaluate it fully. I don't have all the information I would need to make a good recommendation for you. And so all I can do is become more curious about this data you're giving me. But on some level, I'm now failing to spend the time getting to understand your story and building a connection with you. And in turn, you can see me like pour over the statements of the sheets or whatever it is, but you're not building a human connection with me as you see the top of my head and I look down at the paper. So I think it's much more beneficial in those initial conversations to spend the time getting to know this person, and in turn, trying to avoid the nitty-gritty details, because if we can build trust, we'll get to the details. But if we can't build trust, it doesn't matter how many details you put in front of me, we're not going to end up moving forward.
Right. I suppose that's why I really enjoy the initial consult. I like learning about people's families and where they're from and what they want to do on their vacations and everything. And I don't think we even get as deep as some other people. I was listening to Carl Richards' podcast the other day. I know you listen to him too, but he was talking about what questions he asks people. And he was getting even deeper, like, what's your first memory of money and things like that, and like really trying to connect with people. Do you find that a lot of other planners in this space take the same approach when they're first getting to know people?
Unfortunately, no, but there's, I think, a pretty strong divide between sort of two camps. One camp is sort of the minority, and one camp is the majority. And ironically, we fall into the minority here. The minority are people who would fall into more of what in the industry is called like a life planning approach, whether it's a formal life planning or some variation thereof, where it really is about helping a client achieve or attain a form of self actualization through financial planning, right? Sort of in a Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We're going to help satisfy all of their financial needs such that it allows them to thrive as an individual or as a household or a family, whatever the case is. The majority of the industry is very transactional. And in that, I often will bifurcate the term financial advisor and financial planner. I think most financial planners will go about it our way. I think the majority of financial advisors will go about it in a very transactional way where, hey, if you bring a statement to this meeting, we can open an account for you while you're in this initial conversation. We can sign an agreement and we can start a transfer process. You can invest some money and you'll never have to see us again. We'll just get it all done in the next half hour. And that's a very results oriented approach. And clearly, there's a demand for that because that is the majority of the industry. But on some level, what we then typically see is that that's a very transactional relationship. It doesn't involve real financial planning. And by extension from that, the balance is that many people think they've engaged with a financial planner or gotten a financial plan, but really all they've gotten was a warm handshake, a cup of coffee, and some account paperwork.
Yeah, it's interesting because we do get, the detailed information from people eventually in the process, and then it becomes our job to storytell back to them and kind of go through how things would impact their plan and their lives. If you did this, these are the results of how that could be, different ways it could play out, and we take on that storytelling role later in the process again.
Well, and the interesting thing about that is back to sort of being detail avoidant in the conversation. Often, what that's going to boil down to for a client is you will be okay. Right, many clients come to us, and as the analogy goes, as the story goes, right, they're able to swim, they're not drowning, and they're not going to drown. They're maybe not swimming competitively, but they're going to be okay whether they work with us or not. It's just they could do a lot better. And in that sense, it becomes a conversation and a storytelling opportunity around permission to do what you want without money being the limiting factor. That's not to say that we're suddenly giving people lottery winnings and they can buy and spend whatever they want. But within the context of their lives, often that level of uncertainty about the future leads them to a place where they don't find themselves willing or able to make investments in their quality of life or to have certain experiences. Or in turn, they're unaware, right? If things are on the bad side of things, they're unaware that they're on a collision course with catastrophe. And so it becomes an opportunity to show them, hey, you are on a bad path, but by making these adjustments and changes, you will be in a much better place. And that just becomes part of the storytelling element because a lot of people, are living obviously in the present and they understand their past to a decent extent, but the future is very uncertain. And something that we can give is not perfect clarity because we don't have working crystal balls, but we can give them a very healthy understanding of the amount of permission or the necessity of certain decisions ahead of them.
Sure. I see a lot of meetings telling people, not even necessarily specific numbers, although you've showed them to them, but more so like, hey, yeah, you can go on this trip with your son that you've always wanted to go on or something, because that's more what they're needing to hear than looking at spreadsheets. It's more reassuring to them, it seems like, when you've applied it to their actual life.
Because at the end of the day, money is sort of a weird way that we sometimes keep score, and that's where I like my analogy that money is permission. If we have enough permission, then it's permission that we can spend however we like. And in turn, some people have a hard time spending it. But the point I'll make here is, look, if you save all your life and you invest all your life and you don't spend your permission, somebody else will. Right? It'll be something that you either donate or leave behind to somebody else, and maybe that's what you want to do. But I think given a choice between have a lot of money and never use it, or the amount of money doesn't matter, but live your life in accordance with your values and purpose and the things you want out of life, I think pretty much everybody's going to pick that second choice.
Yeah. So it's kind of a fun conversation to have with them when you can tell them that. Which leads me to my next transition. When it's a less fun conversation to have, as of today, we're recording this. Yesterday was election day, and I'm not going to get into personal politics at all, but it does kind of remind me of having to have sensitive conversations with people and the best way to navigate that can be a little bit tough sometimes.
Yeah, that the election does provide a pretty good example, and we've talked in the podcast before, and we've written on the blog many times before. that for every person who wanted the election to go one way, somebody else wanted it to go the other way. And for everybody who thinks that the apocalypse is going to happen if it goes one way, somebody on the other side thinks that the apocalypse is also going to happen if it goes the other way. There's always this two sides issue. But sensitive issues like elections or the results of them are something we deal with. Not everybody lives a cookie cutter nuclear family idyllic life. Many people deal with all sorts of adversity, whether it's the dynamics of their family, the health of them, their own health or family member's health or somebody they're responsible for. And things like political issues, economic issues, et cetera, impact different people in different ways. And the byproduct of that in conversations with clients is that at the end of the day, we as financial planners are not here to pass judgments. We have opinions, right? We can think that things are good or bad, for a client in financial terms or just in personal terms. We can agree or disagree with how they spend their money, where they allocate their money, what they want to invest in or don't want to invest in. But as financial planners, as professionals, our job is fundamentally to help clients obtain the life they want in whatever way is significant to them. For some people, that's, just having a great, enjoyable, wonderful life. For other people, it's providing for their family. For other people, it's taking care of a loved one in need. And those variations are impacted by a huge variety of things. So we have conversations about pretty much every sensitive topic you can think of, right? Whether we're having children, whether we can't have children, whether we want to get married, don't want to get married, whether we want to leave our spouse or be with them forever, whether we want to take care of a parent or whether we don't want to be responsible for that parent when they get to a certain age or a certain level of health and need. And those are tough conversations. And often, again, these are conversations that people are quite often avoiding having, right? And they're in a position in life where they don't feel like they have somebody that they can share those things with. And more importantly, that means that they often feel like they don't have a partner that can help them make those decisions or give them the permission to make the decision that's right for themselves. And that's a role that we often play with our clients.
Yeah. I've had several conversations with people where I can relate to them and, have a good talk with them about it. But I find if they have a differing opinion, I occasionally worry that I'm not connecting with them nearly as much if you're holding back your own opinions. How have you found good ways to bridge that? Because it's still important to connect and be empathetic with people.
On some level, and this might be a little bit of a tell about my personality more so than how other people might approach this. My general approach to that is to try to be as indifferent to the outcome as I possibly can be. And what I mean about that is, as a financial planner, my job is to make sure the numbers work. So if the numbers work, great. Box checked, we can move past that point. And if they don't work, then that becomes a stopping point where it's not about values or beliefs or whatever it is. It's just, hey, look, the numbers don't work. We have to make them work or else. So assuming the numbers work, then at that point, my job on the technical side is done. What you then have as a client is permission to make those decisions or say yes, say no, to do the thing or not do the thing, whatever it is. And at that point, my job is to act as the permission giver to do the thing that you want to do. And in that particular respect, regardless of kind of how emotional or sensitive or challenging, whatever your particular topic or issue is, that's okay. Because I'm not here to judge you for it or tell you it's good, bad, or otherwise. I'm here to support you in doing that thing. I'm here to give you permission to make the decision that's right for you in that case.
That makes a lot of sense for practical things and political issues, especially. I feel like things like money scripts maybe could seep in just because we're not always as aware of them. Everyone knows which way they're voting and how they feel about issues, but money scripts, sometimes you're not even aware that you have. How do you keep those out of conversation?
Well, first of all, everybody has money scripts and everybody has biases, so I'm not going to sit here and say I'm just an unbiased third party. I clearly have, as a financial planner, a preference, again, as I just said, that the numbers have to work. But there's a person out there who doesn't care if the numbers work, who will make decisions regardless of the math and will simply live with the consequences, right? The consequences don't outweigh the benefits of ignoring the math and just doing whatever they want. In the context then of money scripts, and I can just say, having taken the KMSI, I have a slightly elevated money script for money vigilance, which is very common in financial planners, right? We are good about paying attention to money, and otherwise I don't really score high in any particular dimension. The trick with money scripts is that it's not about scoring a 0 and you're perfect and scoring a 3, 5, whatever, and suddenly that's horrific. It's about having balance. So if you have, for example, a high too high of a money vigilance script, then you're going to have a hard time spending money. Conversely, if you have no money vigilant script, you will just throw money away effectively. You will just spend money on anything and never really care about the outcomes. And the same sort of thing applies on both ends of the spectrum. The trick is identifying what your clients' money scripts are, right? What behaviors they're exhibiting and kind of where issues can creep in on either side of that spectrum, and simply supporting them to either, whatever the issue is, right? Spend the money, not spend the money, save the money, not save as much money, whatever is appropriate for them in those particular contexts. But we're not therapists. We're not here to modify their behavior in the sense that we're going to have a therapeutic intervention and we're going to change their personality wholesale. It's about saying, hey, you are where you are. I'm here to help you live that best life in whatever way you will feel most comfortable in doing so, but also in a way that is, again, just by the numbers, going to work out.
I guess that's why I rarely hear you tell people you need to spend less. That's not usually advice you give out because people are the way they are.
They are. I think there's two things to as an audience member, understand about that particular example, though. First and foremost, there's a sample bias here. The majority of our clients have high incomes or have saved a lot and have a decent amount of net worth and assets and so on, where the baseline of their financial plan is they'll be okay. And then when we apply all the modifications to how we're investing, how we're saving, all the various things that financial planning accomplishes, now they have even more money, or they will have even more money. So then it turns into, okay, if you now have all this permission and can have all of this in your life, we now need to turn this around and say, now you should utilize that, right? Otherwise you're going to die with $49 million, and back to the permission thing. If you don't spend it, somebody else will. The second thing to contemplate in that is not related to the outcomes so much as just looking at clients and understanding clients are who they are. They've spent years or decades building certain money habits, a certain quality of life, cost of living, et cetera. So one of the hardest things to do in a financial planning context is to tell somebody outright, spend less. It's just hard. Some people have very specific ways they track their spending. They use budgeting apps and that sort of thing, and that helps them really keep an eye on the numbers. But most of us just sort of have an implicit understanding of what we can afford and what we can't afford. So, for example, somebody here in Longmont might have an income that says, hey, I can afford to eat at Chipotle a couple times a week. Right? It's $8, $9, $10, and that's a small enough amount that I just know implicitly that I can afford to do that. Somebody else might say, I can afford to eat at the Roost or the Pump House, a couple times a week, or any restaurant of similar cost or quality, and that's okay. But I couldn't afford to eat at Martini's or Sugar Beet because that's just a little too rich for my blood, as the expression goes. We all just sort of have this implicit understanding of what is or isn't affordable, right? I can afford to fly coach, or I can afford to fly economy plus or first class, or conversely, I have to price shop because I just need to get the cheapest flight to where I'm going. All of those things are sort of implicit judgments. And there are certain times where you'll pull out your phone and look at your bank balance and say, oh, no, I literally can't afford that. But most of us just have an implicit understanding of what's affordable to us. So from a planning context, coming to a client and saying, hey, whatever your anchor is in that particular sense is wrong. You're spending too much, or you're not saving enough relative to your means. It's really tough. It's one of the hardest conversations to have because spending is often an extension of a quality of life. And so by saying spend less, we're often putting clients in a position to not enjoy their current quality of life. And there's little nitpicky things, right? We can say, hey, you have too much insurance over here, or you're saving too much. You don't actually need to save that much. You can afford to spend that money instead of saving it. Or, hey, if we just go through your transactions, we see that you've got, 19 different streaming subscriptions, and I'll bet you haven't watched half of them in the last 6 months. Maybe we can cut those until the next season of whatever comes out, and you want to get that one back. So there's little tactical things you can do that don't really impact quality of life. But if you have to look at a client and say, hey, sorry, but you need to cut your spending by $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, just outright, it's a really tough proposition because it's going to have an immediate detrimental impact on their day-to-day quality of life, which has the potential to increase their financial anxiety, their financial stress, and lead them to a lesser sense of kind of financial well-being.
Yeah, that's not what I would want to hear. If I engaged a planner and I sat down and that was the first thing they said, it would be very anxiety inducing for me to have to change your whole lifestyle and how you do things on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. And I mean, the better solution then is often increase income or, make some other change, right? Increase our savings, increase income, improve rate of return, whatever it is. But sometimes that's just not the option that's going to be feasible for a client, circumstance to circumstance.
Well, I'm going to touch on your point there where you mentioned, just increasing income rather than decreasing spending. We have plenty of people that come in and they either are wanting to do kind of a side hustle thing or monetize a hobby or do their own thing. They have a lot of vague ideas sometimes in an attempt to increase their income. But I've heard you caution against it in certain circumstances. Can we talk a little bit more about that today?
Sure. Is there an outside business activity you want to disclose to me as your compliance officer?
No, I don't have the time for that, or at least I haven't made it. But I certainly see the appeal. If you have a set salary somewhere and you're like, well, that's not enough, or I want more, I want to be able to do this. If you think, well, I have evenings, I have weekends, I have this time I can use, or perhaps I have this skill set. Surely I can make money with it, but I'm not sure how to do it. You could really waste a lot of time and energy with that. And sometimes it works out. It's not always a waste by any means. But I mean, my biggest concern when I hear about it is how sustainable is it? That much extra time and energy devoted in addition to whatever your full time job is. How long can you do that?
So I think it's a really tricky one, and because we're sort of touching on entrepreneurship, and I think on a fundamental level, the best side hustle-y things are one of two things: either stuff that just immediately produces income. So I don't love this as an example, but doing something like DoorDash or Lyft or Uber, you sign up for the app, you go pick up a person, you drop them off, you get paid, essentially instant income. And so if the point there is just, hey, I need income, and that's the driving factor here, then I don't mind that particular example. On the other side of that, though, I think the most successful businesses are businesses that, even as side hustles, are things where you are drowning in demand for them versus trying to sort of invent a thing or create a thing and force it out into the world. And sometimes it's going to be one or the other, right? Like if you're inventing a new product or creating new art or something like that, seldom is there going to be overwhelming demand for that thing on day one. But you have things like the E-Myth, and there's the example of the pie maker. The person just makes great pies, and then so many people want the pies that they keep making more and more until they can't make more and more and maintain their jobs. They open a pie shop, and then they're making a bunch of pies, and the demand keeps growing, and then they have to hire people to help them with the pies, and then it's a full-time job, and they have employees, and suddenly, down the road, right, 5-10 years later, they've got 10 employees, and they don't make pies anymore. They run a business. Those are sort of ideal side hustles in the sense that the demand for what you have just grossly exceeds the time you have. And so it steadily just absorbs and becomes your primary occupation. I think in the case where it's a hobby or sort of a genuine thing you just enjoy, and you then think about potentially monetizing it, I sort of lean in the direction of don't ruin a good thing by making it about money. If you enjoy stained glass, if you enjoy woodworking, if you enjoy blacksmithing, if you're a Tinkermill member here in Longmont, whatever it is, enjoy your thing. I mean, just enjoy your hobby, enjoy your craft, your activity, whatever it is. And if it gets to the point where you want it to absorb more of your time, it's fine to then think about monetizing it or making money from it. But often, I think the idea of side hustles is sort of half baked. We love the notion that we're going to become financially independent from it one day or double our income from it. But I think there's often an enormous amount of ramp up and time and energy and opportunity costs to how much time it absorbs and energy and potentially money it absorbs to do that we fail to account for when we think about the potential upsides. So all of that to say, I don't think people shouldn't do side hustles. I think they have to have a pretty clear understanding of the costs it presents to have a side hustle, and they have to have an understanding of the necessity of the outcome they're looking to obtain.
Would you be more prone to recommending it if it was like a short term thing? Like someone who said, hey, I want to, do Uber or my stained glass or whichever way they go for the next 2 years because I want to save up a down payment for a house. Would you be more, I don't know, positive feeling about that, or you're still kind of cautionary about it?
I'd be more positive about that because the timeline there is very specific, right? I want to buy a house in the next year or two. I make X dollars, but to afford a house or build up a down payment to be able to buy the kind of house that I want, I really just am going to need an extra 5, 10, 15, $20,000. So I'm going to grind for it. I'm going to do the Uber, DoorDash, Lyft type stuff and just make extra money for a while to help build that savings. That's fine because there's a specific objective. It's measurable. There's a particular timeline, and we can make a reasonable assessment of how much money we need to make that happen, and can then assess the potential channels for doing that. I think where people get into a weird spot is when they are, let's say, a successful practicing attorney billing $300, $400 an hour, and they decide that they're going to side hustle and make $7 an hour making jewelry. And there's nothing wrong if you want to make jewelry and like sell it at fairs or whatever, but just in general, if the whole purpose was financial, not personal enjoyment or satisfaction or just enjoying your hobby, right? But it was to make money, that lawyer would be much better off just billing more hours in that particular case. Now, there's plenty of reasons that they can still just say, I burn out on my practice, so I work more than X hours a week, so I'm just going to have to do something else. So be it. But I think a lot of people forget the value of their time if they had just kept their job or kept working, then making that transition to entrepreneurship.
Sure. I think you've made that comment even to me, as much as we joked about me doing anything else on the weekends. It makes a lot more sense for me to do more professional development stuff in my field here working for you and try to get a promotion out of you than to go get a job somewhere else on the weekends just for an hourly wage.
Yeah. And all of that is a byproduct of also giving you clear expectations, right? If the career path here was work super hard to get clients, become a better financial planner, and at some point down the road, you're going to have to ask me for a promotion and a raise, or one day I will pluck you from the masses and decide that it's your time to get that promotion and raise, then something like that ambiguity might lead you to say, well, I don't know how long it's going to take, and I don't know what the outcome is, and I don't know what the upsides are, so I will do something else because I'm not sure about the outcomes. I think certainty plays a really important factor, or provides a particularly important role in the conversation about whether you should do something on the side. But I think the easiest thing for anybody in that situation to do is just to go talk to their manager or the HR and say, hey, I would like to increase my income. I would like to increase my earning potential because I want to do something like buy a house or take a trip, whatever the case is. Help me understand what I can do to earn a bonus, get a raise, get a promotion, right? What can I bring to the table of this company or this firm to improve my value to it, and in turn improve what they're willing to pay me as a result of that. I think that is by far the easiest path. And it's a strange thing because people have this weird taboo that you're not supposed to talk about money or talk about those sorts of things. You're not supposed to ask for raises except for all the times you're supposed to. It's a strange conversation where on some level, I think a lot of people avoid tough conversations with their company. But if you have uncertainty, push to get certainty and try to avoid vague notions of, hey, if you do this, maybe. Like, no, very clear articulable things. If I bring in business, if I sell X whatevers, if I develop this software, if I create an efficiency that saves us money, whatever it is, what is my upside? Let's just have a very clear expectation of that. Or what do I need to do X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3 to get the next promotion to move up to the next step? Very explicitly, very directly, and not just like, hey, we'll talk about it at your review next year.
Yeah, I think you did a blog post about that a while back, didn't you? Where it was almost a script for how to do that.
Yes, and by extension from that as well, the other thing that I bring up, and I say it to you as my employee, right, is I think people should be far more mercenary about their careers and their income and their jobs. And I don't love saying that from the standpoint of like, hey, I'd love it if you worked here for the rest of your career. But I do look at clients regularly, and I do think about it for other people or get asked about it for other people all the time, particularly financial planners, which I think is funny, that many people have sort of a disproportionate degree of loyalty to their business, to their job, to the organization they work for, that is fundamentally not reciprocated. And that becomes an opportunity cost to them. Whereas if they were kind of keeping an eye on the horizon every 2 to 3 years to make a career change or move, if they were not accelerating in their career adequately, they would probably be a lot better off. And that's something that I think we just have to reconcile at the end of the day. Business necessity will sometimes lead the business not to give you all the opportunities you otherwise are qualified or eligible for. And in turn, no one is going to, lift you up just on their own volition for no reason without a clear set of expectations or an expectation that there is likely to be an upside to doing so. So for anybody thinking about increasing their income, doing a side hustle, whatever the case is, just get really real about where you are in your career, what your potential is. And for that matter, be very honest with yourself. Like everybody likes to say they're an A player, but most people are not. Statistically, it's just not possible that everybody's an A player. So if you're an A player, great, pursue things. But if you know that you're kind of a D plus person, right, you get by and cruise through life, generally speaking, just understand that you're either going to have to become an A player to get that done, or you're going to have to look at other options and opportunities if you're not willing to put in the work for it.
Yeah. Well, you've given me plenty to think about.
Well, in turn, why don't you give us something to think about? What is the most valuable thing you've learned or picked up in the last couple of weeks since you've been on the podcast?
I think I've been paying more attention to how you interact with people, which kind of probably leads to why the first two topics we had today were what they were, watching the human element and interaction portion of it all. The technicalities of this job are very interesting and important, but I've focused a little bit more on like how you respond to people when they ask tough questions or when they ask for something that's maybe beyond what we can or should offer at that point, anything like that. I'm getting a lot of value out of learning those little tidbits, I guess.
I think it's valuable for everybody to spend some time to think about how they communicate in their day-to-day life, because a lot of communication is instinctive and reflexive, and we don't really think about it. We just say the thing, or we just write the thing and send off the text or the message or whatever it is. But I do think it helps to be introspective and to really pay attention to what messaging you're sending out into the world. There's a really interesting observation that, and it's a fun exercise that you can do in some classes or some group settings, where essentially everybody in the room is given a list of traits, like this person is a good chef, this person is thoughtful, this person would make a big sacrifice for a friend, and so on. And you give everybody that list and then ask them to pick a person in the room for each of those things secretly, and then you collate the outcomes. And what you'll find is that there tends to be an enormous amount of overlap in people's perception of the same person, and the traits or the signals that they send off based on how they dress, how they communicate, and so on. And so I think it's something to be mindful of, is that whether you think you are or not, you are sending out certain messages to the world and to the community as a whole around you. And it is helpful to observe the desirable traits you see in how other people communicate or what other people share or send out, and to look at yourself and say, do I share those same traits? Do I show those same things? Or am I sending out something that I actually don't want to put out into the world?
Yeah. We have such a mix of personalities here at the office, and we all get along really well, but we also operate so differently. I have a lot of fun watching everyone, including you, and how they operate.
Well, message to Daniel and Greg, careful, Emily's watching you.
I'm taking notes.
The Science of Wealth is produced by My Wealth Planners, a registered investment advisor in Colorado. The theme song is This Is Your Time by Dan Phillips. The podcast is intended for educational purposes only and is not investment advice or any other form of advice. Not all material discussed on the podcast is appropriate for every individual in every circumstance, so you should consult with a certified financial planner, tax professional, or legal professional as appropriate before attempting to apply any of the subjects, strategies, or tactics discussed on the podcast.